4:08 p.m. on Saturday, a fire started near the California-Nevada border. By dinner time, it had already burned 3,000 acres. By sunrise, it had more than doubled. More than 6,500 acres burned in under 24 hours. And right now, the fire is sitting at 0% containment. The ground, D, is burning. The wind is howling. People are fleeing their homes. Nearly 3,800 households have already been evacuated. And there's one specific thing driving this fire, a local wind phenomenon that meteorologists in this region watch more closely than almost anything else, because it's the single biggest factor deciding whether this fire keeps spreading or finally slows down. If you want to understand what's actually happening here, not just the headlines, stick with me. I'm going to walk you through all of it. Let's start with what started this fire. It's called the Bug Fire, and it ignited east of U.S. Route 395 in Lassen County, California, right near the state line. According to CAL FIRE incident information, the Bug Fire started at approximately 4:08 in the afternoon on Saturday, August 8th ES, east of U.S. Route 395 and south of Bridgman Road in Lassen County. The fire grew extraordinarily fast over the following hours, roughly 50 acres shortly after ignition, about 800 acres by early evening, over 2,200 acres later that Saturday, past 4,000 acres by around 7 p.m., and 6,528 acres by 11:49 p.m. that same night. Here's the honest truth about what started this. We don't know yet. Officials with the Bureau of Land Management's Carson City District have not determined the cause. It remains under active investigation. What we do know is that the conditions were already primed for disaster. Red F-lag warnings were active across the region. The National Weather Service had issued warnings for gusty winds and low humidity, exactly the kind of conditions that let a fire rapidly grow in size and intensity before first responders can get ahead of it. The timeline alone tells you how fast this developed. A fire that didn't exist at lunchtime was forcing evacuations by dinner. That's the reality of a wind-driven fire moving across a landscape that's been baked dry by weeks of extreme heat. Washoe County's Regional Emergency Information Center formally described it as a wind-driven wildfire, with an explicit warning that conditions can change rapidly. Let me walk you through exactly how this fire exploded hour by hour. At 4:08 p.m., the Bug Fire started east of US 395. Initial reports put it at roughly 50 acres. Within hours, wind pushed it past 800 acres. By early evening, it had grown to over 2,200 acres. Then came the real acceleration. By 7 p.m., the fire had reached over 4,000 acres, with containment still sitting at 0%. By 11:49 p.m. Saturday, it had reached 6,528 acres. By Sunday morning, it had spread directly into Washoe County, Nevada. Fire officials confirmed it was now burning across 3 counties, Lassen and Sierra in California, and Washoe in Nevada. So how does a fire go from 50 acres to 6,500 acres in a matter of hours? The answer comes down to 2 things, fuel and wind. The fuel is cheatgrass, an invasive plant that has completely transformed this landscape. The wind is the Washoe Zephyr, a locally named phenomenon that kicks in almost every evening during fire season. Now let's talk about the wind, because this is genuinely the single most important factor in how this fire behaves. Meteorologists in this region call it the Washoe Zephyr. It's a locally named wind that arrives almost every evening during summer, usually somewhere between 5 and 9 p.m. in the Reno area. Typical wind gusts run from 15 to 25 miles per hour. Occasionally gusts push past 30. And even a modest 15 to 25 mile an hour breeze is genuinely enough to push a fire's spread rate beyond what ground crews can keep pace with. Calm winds would be ideal for firefighters. These are not calm conditions. The Washoe Zephyr is created by pressure and temperature differences between the Sierra Nevada mountains and the hot desert basins of central Nevada. Forecasters typically compare the temperature in Truckee to the temperature in Low, Veloc, to estimate how strong that evening's wind will be. As a rough rule, if it's 90 degrees in Lovelock and 70 in Truckee, the Zephyr will likely be gusting somewhere around 30 miles per hour. If there's a weather system moving through the region on top of that gradient, the Zephyr tends to run even stronger than normal. Why does this matter so much for this specific fire? Because the Washoe Zephyr blows in from the west, and it hits right during the hottest part of the day, exactly when fire activity is already at its peak. It's the combination of wind and heat arriving together on a predictable daily schedule that makes this fire so dangerous. Washoe County has now dealt with 2 wind-driven fires in the same general corridor in under 2 years. The 2024 Davis Fire burned through roughly 5,000 acres, destroyed 14 homes, and forced about 20,000 people to evacuate. It took 18 days to fully contain. The Bug Fire is burning through the same kind of terrain with the same kind of fuel under the same kind of wind conditions that drove that earlier fire. This wind isn't new. Mark Twain was among the first to write about it, referring to it as the Washoe Zephyr in his book Roughing It. He described it as powerful enough to wreak havoc on the Comstock. On March 2nd, 1879, that same wind was reportedly blowing harder than anyone in the region could remember. Sparks from a stovepipe set a stack of wood on fire. The wind turned it into an inferno. 10 square blocks burned, 5 people died. The pattern has been repeating in this exact geography for close to a century and a half. A fire starts, the wind picks up, the fire explodes, and firefighters race to stay ahead of the same wind that's feeding the flames. Here's exactly who's being told to leave right now, based on the most recent evacuation information available. Evacuation orders have been in effect for parts of Cold Springs, Canyon Hills, White Lake, Silver Knolls, and areas north of Cold Springs. The Washoe County Sheriff's Office has been urging residents not to wait because fire conditions can change rapidly. In California, Lassen County issued an evacuation warning for Zone LAS 6 Centimes 1B, and Sierra County issued a warning for Zone SIE EEU 25. A warning designation, as opposed to an order, means residents should be prepared to leave at a moment's notice, not that they must leave immediately. But given how fast this fire has already moved, that distinction shouldn't be treated casually. An evacuation center was established at the Evelyn Mount Community Center at 1301 Valley Road in Reno. A separate large animal evacuation center was set up at the Reno Livestock Events Center, accessible through Gate 2. One important caveat before we go further: fire conditions, containment percentages, and evacuation zones change by the hour during an active incident like this. Treat every specific number and zone in this video as a snapshot of where things stood as this was written, not as a live update. Always check official channels directly before making any decisions. As of Sunday morning, fire officials had confirmed that no structures had been lost and no injuries had been reported. The evacuations were described as precautionary, ordered largely because of the fire's proximity to routes like US 395, which created genuine risk for anyone trying to move through the area. Still, 0% containment means the situation remained highly active and could shift quickly in either direction. Deputy Chief Shannon Lewis of Truckee Meadows Fire put the stakes about as plainly as it can be put. If there's an evacuation warning issued for your area, it is genuinely important to leave. The University of Nevada, Reno Extension, has put together a practical list of go-bag essentials for evacuations like this one. It includes important documents such as insurance policies, medical records and birth certificates, banking information, ATM cards, credit and debit cards, and small bills of cash, medications, prescription numbers, and vaccination records, both for people and for pets, non-perishable food and bottled water for 72 hours, a driver's license and passport, backup copies of computer files or passwords, a cell phone charger, car charger, and backup battery packs, toiletries, and a change of clothing for 3 to 5 days, and where there's time, family heirlooms, photo albums, and videos. If you're ordered to evacuate because of a wildfire, what you're wearing can genuinely reduce your risk of injury. The extension specifically recommends cotton or wool clothing, long pants, a long sleeve shirt or jacket, a hat, and boots to help protect your skin from radiant heat, and flying embers. Synthetic materials can melt onto skin and cause severe burns, so that distinction actually matters. They also recommend carrying gloves and goggles, along with a NIOSH-rated N95 or 100 mask to help filter out particulates and protect your lungs from smoke. Let's go a little deeper on the cheatgrass factor, because it's genuinely one of the most important and least understood pieces of why fire seasons in this part of the West have gotten so much worse. Sea heatgrass, scientifically known as Bromus tectorum, isn't native to the American West at all. It's an invasive species introduced to North America from Eurasia in the mid-1800s. It's now so widespread and so deeply embedded in Nevada's landscape that it's largely stopped being treated as a targeted noxious weed problem. It's simply everywhere. In a wet winter, cheatgrass sprouts explosively, covering the desert floor in a dense green mat. Then summer arrives, the grass dries out completely, and what's left behind is a continuous carpet of fine, flammable fuel that lets fire race across terrain that would once have naturally slowed it down. Native desert vegetation typically grows in patches, with bare soil in between acting as a natural fire break. Cheatgrass fills in those gaps entirely. No breaks, no barriers, just a continuous sea of flammable material from one edge of a valley to the other. Fire ecologists have documented that cheatgrass-dominated landscapes burn significantly more often than the native sagebrush ecosystems they've replaced. Each fire wipes out more of the native, slower-burning vegetation, while cheatgrass regrows aggressively in the aftermath, actively reshaping the landscape into something more flammable, one fire at a time. It has a genuinely self-perpetuating relationship with fire. It creates such a continuous fine fuel load that it promotes wildfire so frequently that native shrubs and perennial grasses never get the chance to reproduce or reestablish themselves. Historic fire return intervals in these ecosystems used to be measured in decades. In cheatgrass-dominated terrain today, they're often measured in single-digit years. The 2024 Davis fire burned through exactly this kind of cheatgrass-dominated terrain. so is the bug fire. Abundant cheatgrass, a sudden wind event, and extreme heat that's been preventing any meaningful overnight moisture recovery in the fuel. Once wind and cured fuel take over like this, the original ignition source barely matters to how the fire behaves going forward. D. What matters most at that point is how fast crews can get ahead of it. Researchers have understood for decades that cheatgrass was reshaping this landscape, and FEMA and Washoe County are now working on projects specifically aimed at combating it. Invasive species management and native plant reintroduction among them, though those efforts operate on a much slower timeline than the fires themselves. So what are crews actually doing right now to fight this fire? Multiple agencies are working around the clock, including CAL FIRE, Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District, the Bureau of Land Management, TIHE, Nevada Division of Forestry, and local departments across the affected counties. The Nevada Division of Emergency Management confirmed it's coordinating with Washoe County and neighboring counties to support the broader wildfire suppression effort. There is some genuinely good news in the latest reporting. Forward progress on the fire has largely been stopped. Firefighters made enough progress on containment lines to allow evacuations to be lifted in the Cold Springs neighborhood. Areas that had previously been evacuated around White Lake and Village Parkway were reopened, with residents told they could return home. All the off-ramps on US 395 North that had been closed because of the fire have reopened as well. Some closures were expected to remain in place a bit longer and be reevaluated as conditions allowed, including Red Rock Road between Mira Loma Boulevard and American Flat Road, and Lemon Drive at Ramsey Way. Crews and law enforcement were expected to remain active in the area regardless, and residents were urged to stay cautious and watch for emergency vehicles and personnel moving through. The wind is still the ultimate wild card here. Firefighters can build containment lines steadily through the calmer morning hours, and then watch a fire jump those same lines entirely once afternoon heat builds and the Zephyr kicks in. That evening G window, roughly 5 to 9 p.m., is the genuinely dangerous stretch. It's when this fire has consistently made its fastest, most unpredictable runs. That's also why the next 24 to 48 hours after any update like this one remain so critical to how the story actually ends. As of the most recent reports available, no structures had been lost and no injuries had been reported. The evacuation center at the Evelyn Mount Community Center sheltered close to 70 residents overnight, with more choosing to stay outside in the parking lot rather than indoors. Sea-Verrill area hotels offered reduced rates for people displaced by the fire, including the Grand Sierra Resort, the Peppermill, and the downtown properties of the El Dorado, Circus, and Silver Legacy, generally requiring proof of residency, with resort fees waived for affected guests. So what actually determines whether the bug fire ends up as a contained, manageable incident or turns into a repeat of the Davis fire? The honest answer comes down almost entirely to one measurement, the Washoe Zephyr. Meteorologists compare Truckee's afternoon temperature against Lovelock's each day, because that gap is what predicts how hard the Zephyr will blow that evening. If wind speeds stay in a moderate range, crews have a real chance to build and hold containment lines. If gusts climb well past that threshold, the fire can jump those same lines entirely, and spot fires can start well ahead of the main fire front. Here's how the next stretch could realistically play out. In the better scenario, the Zephyr stays in its typical 15 to 25 mile an hour range each evening. Crews keep building containment lines, the fire's growth slows, and this becomes a manageable, if serious, incident. In the worst scenario, the Zephyr climbs into the 30 to 40 mile an hour range on one or more evenings. Geez, the fire keeps running. Spot fires ignite ahead of the main line from wind-carried embers. Evacuation zones expand. And this turns into a longer, harder fight, closer to what happened with the Davis fire, which took 18 days to contain, burned roughly 5,000 acres, and destroyed 14 homes. The acreage numbers matter, but the real margin here is thin, and wind is what decides which side of that margin this fire lands on. Smoke from the fire has also been affecting air quality across northern Nevada and northeastern California. An air quality index in the moderate range generally means conditions are acceptable for most people, though anyone unusually sensitive to air pollution may notice symptoms and should consider reducing prolonged or heavy outdoor exertion if that happens. Wildfire smoke contains fine particulate matter that can penetrate deep into the lungs and, for some people, affect the heart and respiratory system more broadly, not just breathing comfort in the moment. If you're in an evacuation zone right now, here's what actually needs to happen. Leave immediately. Don't wait for a second notice, and don't try to pack more than the essentials. Go means go now, not after a gradual, unhurried departure. Check live evacuation maps directly rather than relying on social media posts that might already be an hour old. See, conditions here have been changing that fast. Follow official emergency management channels for updates, not secondhand reposts. Bring your essentials, The University of Nevada, Reno extensions list again medications and medical supplies, important documents like IDs, insurance paperwork and medical records, phone chargers and backup batteries, food and water for 72 hours, a change of clothes, and anything irreplaceable like family photos, if there's genuinely time to grab them safely. Evacuate your animals too, and do it early. If you have pets or livestock, take them with you rather than leaving them behind on the assumption you'll be back as soon. Washoe County Regional Animal Services has been accepting small animals at 2825 Longley Lane. The large animal shelter at the Reno Sparks Livestock Events Center has had space available, though resources there are limited, so residents have also been encouraged to self-evacuate animals to a friend or family member's property when that's an option. Check on your neighbors if you're able to safely do so. A 2-minute knock on a neighbor's door has genuinely saved lives in emergencies like this one, especially for anyone elderly, disabled, or simply not plugged into the same alert systems everyone else is watching. If you're not in an evacuation zone but live nearby, stay alert anyway. Conditions here have already proven they can shift within a single evening. Keep monitoring official emergency channels rather than assuming you're in the clear because you weren't included in the first wave. E of notices. Watch the air quality too. You can track the index and wildfire smoke conditions directly through airnow.gov or its mobile app. Avoid driving near the fire zone. US 395 has already been affected by closures, and staying out of the area helps keep routes clear for emergency vehicles. And across all of this, Leah and on official sources for updates rather than social media rumors, which tend to spread fastest and least accurately during exactly this kind of fast-moving incident. Officials have specifically asked residents to avoid calling 911 for anything other than a genuine new emergency, and to instead call the Washoe 311 line for general information. The bug fire isn't an isolated event, and it's part of what's already shaping up to be one of the more severe wildfire years in recent memory across the West. Millions of acres have already burned nationally this season, running above typical multi-year averages. Oregon has had dozens of active large fires burning simultaneously. Idaho and Washington have both had significant years of large active fires covering hundreds of thousands of acres combined. Nevada crews have also been working other major fires elsewhere in the state at the same time as the bug fire, including large, low-containment fires in our counties, all part of the same underlying pattern of cured cheatgrass, extended heat, and repeated red flag wind events across the region. State agencies have issued joint statements confirming they're coordinating suppression resources across multiple simultaneous incidents rather than treating any one fire in isolation. Roughly 2 months before this fire ignited, Nevada's governor and state officials held a briefing specifically warning that this was shaping up to be a dangerous fire year. By early August, statewide and regional monitoring already showed activity running above the 10-year age for both fire count and total acreage burned. That warning turned out to be accurate. The bug fire is burning through exactly the kind of cheatgrass fuel terrain officials flagged months ago during a summer that's been hotter and drier than average across the region. What's genuinely different today compared to a century ago isn't the wind. The Washoe Zephyr has been blowing through this landscape for as long as anyone's been keeping records, and it clearly hasn't changed. What's changed is the fuel. Cheatgrass has transformed the landscape from patchy, naturally fir, heat-resistant sagebrush terrain into a nearly continuous carpet of fine, fast-drying fuel. Fire return intervals that used to run decades apart have dropped to a matter of a few years in some of these areas. The land itself is simply more flammable than it's ever been in the historical record. And that's a big part of why fires like this one and the Davis fire before it have been able to grow so explosively in such a short window of time. So what's the actual bottom line here? A wind-driven wildfire that didn't exist a day earlier had already burned more than 6,500 acres within 24 hours. It forced evacuations across communities in Othioth, Nevada, and California. It's burning through exactly the kind of cheatgrass fuel terrain that produced the same region's most destructive recent fire less than 2 years ago. Its cause remained under investigation. As of the most recent updates, no structures had been lost and no injuries had been reported. Genuinely good news, but not a guarantee of how the rest of this plays out. And whether that stays true likely depends, more than anything else, on a wind pattern that actually has a name. If there's one sentence to take away from all of this, let it be this. The outcome here will likely be decided by the Washoe Zephyr, and specifically by whether it stays in its typical range or climbs into the stronger gusts that can turn a fire cruiser gaining on back into one that's running away from them again. Stay informed and stay safe. If you're anywhere near the evacuation zones in Washoe or Lassen County, check the live evacuation map directly and follow instructions from local law enforcement rather than word of mouth. Given how quickly this specific fire has already changed shape more than once, treat every number in this video as a snapshot rather than the current status, and verify directly with official sources before making any decisions about your own safety. We'll keep tracking this as containment numbers update. There's one more piece of context worth understanding, because it explains why this particular stretch of the California-Nevada border keeps showing up in fire coverage year after year. The terrain east of the Sierra Nevada sits in what's called a rain shadow. The mountains wring most of the moisture out of Pacific storm system. EMs before they ever reach the desert basins on the other side. That's what makes this landscape naturally arid to begin with, and it's also what makes cheatgrass such a perfect fit for it. Cheatgrass germinates fast, uses whatever moisture is available extremely efficiently in late winter and early spring, and then simply dies back, and dries out well before native perennial grasses would. That timing mismatch is part of why it's been able to outcompete native vegetation across such a wide stretch of the Great Basin over the past century and a half. It's not just tolerant of these conditions, it's actually built for them in a way the native ecosystem historically wasn't racing against. Firefighting agencies in this region have adapted their tactics around exactly this pattern. Crews often push hardest on containment lines during the morning and early afternoon hours, when winds are calmest and fire behavior is most predictable, specifically because I know the Zephyr is coming later in the day and will test whatever lines they've managed to build. Aircraft, both fixed-wing air tankers and helicopters carrying water or retardant, tend to be used most heavily during that same calmer window. Since high winds later in the D, I can ground aircraft entirely, or make retardant drops far less effective and considerably more dangerous to fly. That's part of why officials keep repeating that the next 24 to 48 hours matter so much after any update. It isn't just a generic phrase. It reflects a real operational rhythm where each day's outcome depends heavily on how much containment crews can lock in before the evening wind arrives and tests it again. None of that changes what residents in the affected zones need to do right now, which is simple regardless of the larger pattern. Follow the evacuation orders and warnings that apply to your specific area. Keep your go bag ready, even if you're only under a warning rather than a full ordy. And don't assume that because a fire seemed to slow down overnight, it will behave the same way once the afternoon heat and evening wind build again. Fires like this one have shown repeatedly in this exact region that calm mornings and explosive evenings can be part of the very same day.